Hello, everyone, and welcome to the At Matters podcast presented by the Outer Loop Theater Experience, where we create art that matters. I am Rachel Yoder. I am the artistic director of the Outer Loop, and here on the At Matters podcast, we create a space to explore the question, what are we here to do?
Hi.
Who are you?
I'm Melissa Wilson. I'm the marketing director and Inner Enso facilitator for the Outer Loop, and I'm excited to be here for this episode. Yeah, we're going to start off, as always, with our 5 things game to get us all kind of in a shared headspace. So, Rachel, I'm going to give you this category. What are 5 things that you just love to yap about?
Oh, that's good. 5 things that I just love to yap about. I love to yap about theater to anyone who will listen. And sometimes people really are not interested in listening. So I like being around other theater people who also love to yap about theater, because then
Yes.
just yap about it all day long. Similarly, I love to yap about like the whatever show that I'm currently watching and loving. Like right now, I just finished season 3 of The Bear, and like I will yap about that all day, every day. I will give you every opinion that I have, unless you haven't seen it yet, in which case I will not spoil it for you.
Great.
But I love to yap about that. When I'm reading a good book, it is such a shame. I should really join a book club because I always want to yap about the book that I'm reading. And there's like never anyone reading the same thing at the same time. Or like if somebody's read it, they're like, I don't remember. I'm like, but we have to talk about that one thing, that specific thing. So I love to yap about that. I love to yap about human behavior. Like, I just think that people are just like endlessly fascinating, and the things that people do and like why they do them are just like, I could talk about that forever. And what else do I love to yap about? I feel like there are so many things that I just really get going on. Oh, like this is related to the first one, but like I am such a Shakespeare nerd that like if you want to get in a conversation about Shakespeare with me, like you better have 5 hours because I will yap and yap and yap and yap.
Good.
That's good.
Good.
That was a good one.
Thanks. All right.
All right. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
This is gonna be a little bit of a turn. It's a little tone shift here. 5 things that you wish that people had more empathy around.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
5 things I wish people had more empathy around. Okay, specifically lately, I'm thinking a lot about the election. I wish that there was more empathy for people who are going to vote differently than you, as well as for the candidates themselves, as flawed as they are. A second thing is I wish people had more empathy for people of different socioeconomic standings. I think that we just don't realize how much our perspective is shaped by how much money we have and how much money we grew up with, like myself very much included in that. I find myself saying incredibly ignorant things sometimes where I'm just like, oh, no, that's not how the rest of the world or a large portion of the world experiences this, and I have to like check myself on that, but I think we don't always realize that. I wish people had more empathy for people with differently abled bodies. That's something that I feel like I've been learning about more recently, just like how hard it is to be a person in a wheelchair or a person who is deaf or all these sorts of things that we think that we're getting better at being accessible, but there's actually like so much more room to grow. This is coming to my mind, so I'm gonna say it even though it's way sillier. I need cat and dog people to just like not be well, really selfishly I want people to not be so disgusted by cats because I love cats. but I also appreciate dogs, so we can work on that. And
Guilty as
then
charged. I have
about
work to
cats.
do. Yeah. I
Oh,
mean, I'm also allergic, so that doesn't help, but yeah.
that is challenging. That is challenging. Yeah. Okay, a last one is we need more empathy. I think just in general for like people who disagree with us. I know that that's very broad, but we all believe the things that we believe because we believe that they're right and we feel that we know that they're right in most cases, and yet someone else, you know, knows that the opposite thing is right. And I think that we need to find respect for that level of conviction even if we don't respect the conviction itself. um yeah, so
Nice.
those are my things. That was a
Those are
good
good.
question.
It's good 5 things.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Intent,
Yeah.
a little bit of a leading 5 things.
Yes, you could say that. Um, yeah, so leading us into, we're going to talk about the Empathy Project today. Um, and I don't want to give too much intro because I would love for you to just share about kind of the origins of this project because it's been around for a while and I think that will help give people a lot of context.
Yes. Good. Good place to start. Yeah. So the Empathy Project as an idea came around right at the start of the pandemic in 2020. Um, there was a lot, obviously, a lot going on at the time. And it was rough. I mean, it has, I feel like we all maybe have like a sort of like chosen collective amnesia around that time because it was so traumatizing and it was like so awful and it was crazy what was happening. And so I think we're all just like, that was a thing in the past that I don't think about ever again. But it's like when you do stop and think about it, you're like, whoa, that was wild. So it came around that time. I mean, we had obviously everything was shut down. We weren't able to make art, and people were so angry and so divided and so upset and so and because we were all in survival mode. I mean, you didn't know, it was a dangerous time and it was a scary time and it was just like, but it was also a time where it felt like, if we were already struggling with empathy, then there was even less then. And we just felt like there were just a lot of people screaming into the void and nobody was understanding each other or trying to take the time to understand somebody else's perspective. So, and we wanted to be able to create a piece of art somehow and to collaborate with other artists because that's what we do. So all of those things combined, we were also, I have to give credit where credit is due. We were forwarded, one of our board members forwarded us an article where Barack Obama was talking about the empathy deficit in our society. And he sort of sent it to us like, hey, I think there's more to this empathy deficit thing. Like, can you explore this as a company? And we thought, yeah, how do we explore that empathy deficit through a piece of art in some way? So we had further conversations with the board, and what we heard a lot was, we're a little bit in an echo chamber here. And a lot of people are in self-selected echo chambers, and we're only hearing one perspective all of the time and just sort of like, yep, I agree with that. And I have empathy for that, for just that, I have all the empathy for people who agree with me. And we don't often, which is, it was also in that article that the board member had sent us, that's called dark empathy. That's like only having empathy for people who agree with you. And you see that a lot. It's like, oh, I'm a very empathetic person, as long as you think the same way that I think. And so we were like, how do we invite in that opposite perspective? How do we start to foster empathy between people who think differently? So the idea came to us to first put out a call for stories specifically centered around the pandemic because everybody was having a different experience with it. And we wanted to hear from people. So what's been your experience with the pandemic? Like, where are you at with it? How is it affecting you? How is it affecting your life? Like, what is your pandemic story? So we put out a call for stories, and we wanted to reach as many different perspectives as possible. Like, what, what's this person's perspective, and get all those voices in the space. And then we put out a call for artists, and we were like, whatever kind of artist, any like theater artist, dance, music, every type of art, painters. Um, and our idea was to pair an artist with a story and have that artist create a piece of art based on the story. And ideally, in our dream version of it, we wanted to like take a perspective that the artist maybe didn't agree with. And so through the process of creating the art, you would have to, by necessity, empathize with the person whose story it was. And then through the process of someone taking someone else's story, empathizing with that story and sharing it, that the audience would then be exposed to, oh, now I empathize with that story, even if I disagree with it. So that was the idea. That was kind of the original idea. Of course, all this had to be done virtually because it was COVID times. And so we did, in fact, create a virtual production based on this concept. And it was very cool. It did a lot for, I think, not only the artists that we worked with, but also in achieving its goal of fostering a little bit more empathy. But I will say, and this is where we'll transition probably a little bit into what is going on now, we had a hard time reaching opposite perspectives. And even though we put out, a call for stories from everybody, and we tried as best we could at the time to invite in alternate perspectives outside of our echo chamber, we didn't get as many as we wanted to. And so in that sense, I think we could have done better. We could have done more. And that's maybe why the idea has kind of lived on in our, shared company brain of like things to revisit for a while, because we didn't quite get in as much of the opposition thought point as we wanted.
Right. Yeah. No, that's so cool. So you had two different iterations during kind of COVID times, virtual theater. Yeah. And then it just paused for a little bit. And so for me, I think this was back in like January. I was looking for something on our website, which I've looked at a million times, but for whatever reason, I saw this stuff about the Empathy Project and I just stopped and I like reread through everything. And I was like, wait, this is so good. Just this concept of like this empathy deficit and trying to connect people of different perspectives and all of that. And I was like, wait, this is so good. Like, are we doing anything else with this? And so I chatted with Michael about it, and he shared kind of what you just said, that he was like, we want to do more, but we're just not really sure what the next step is. And I was like, okay, let me think about it. And I think what became clear really quickly for me is I was like, oh, I think that what has been a struggle for me for the last several years of my life is actually maybe what's gonna serve this project in a really cool way. And that is that for the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've felt almost constantly like I'm walking this weird line between my theater community and my faith-based community as an evangelical Christian. And so those are both communities that I have a lot of love for and that have poured into me a lot, and that I hope that I've been able to pour into a lot as well. But in general, if we're going to speak very stereotypically, the theater side is generally very left-leaning and the Christian side is generally a lot more right-leaning, in ways that for both sides are very personal, very just like important to the core of who you are, based in deeply rooted beliefs that you have as a person. And therefore it can just be hard to like see fully the other side of those things. And yet they're both communities that have a high value for love and humanity and empathy, because on the theater and the art side, it's about, everything we've been talking about on this podcast, holding up a mirror to the world, expressing empathy. How can we can't play a character well unless we understand them, all of these sorts of things. And on the faith-based side, it's, Christianity is about loving people and everyone is created equally in the image of God and all these sorts of things that are like similar rhetoric and yet ending up being applied in very different ways that can often lead to a lot of division.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been hard for me, feeling like I have one foot in each a lot of the time, to know how to walk that in a way that I could be truthful about who I was fully to both sides, and also be respectful to both sides, as I walked there. So when Michael said that, kind of that had been the issue of feeling like you couldn't reach the broadest spectrum of perspectives, I was like, I think maybe I can. Like,
I know these people.
Yes, yeah. And so he was like, great, well, do some brainstorming. And so I was like, I think that, I mean, there's so many problems and I'm not going to solve them all with one play, but I was like, I think that a big part of this is that we're either seeing just the like personal humanity side of a person where it's a lot easier to connect, or we're just seeing the political side where it's a lot harder to connect, and like both are part of any person in the US. And so I developed an interview structure that was a series of 4 political questions that I felt like hit on things that are top of mind for people. So the presidential election, abortion, gun rights, and LGBTQ rights. And then the second half of the interview is a series of more like personal questions that focus more on your priorities, what makes you feel understood or misunderstood, what you feel like you have in common versus not in common with the people around you and people that you perceive as, people that you disagree with, and those sorts of things. And my kind of hypothesis was, I think that the first half answers are going to be super different and the second half answers are going to look a lot the same. And now, having completed all of my interviews, that hypothesis was pretty true. It's like as different as the first half was as similar as the second half was. And obviously, like, different people are going to have different priorities, and also people interpret questions differently. Like, some people I would be like, what's your highest priority? And they're like, serving my family and serving the world. And some people are like, getting more sleep. And I'm like, okay, I think we took this question in different directions, which is totally fine. And also different people are just at different places in life. My priority as a, single 22-year-old is going to be different than someone's priority who, has kids, grandkids to take care of, all these sorts of things. So, but still within that, there was so much similarity, and it was so interesting to see how, 2 people with such seemingly similar perspectives on life and on what's important about life, and even with the same like facts as it came to political matters, could end up coming up with such different answers to certain questions. It was like, you guys would be besties, except that I think this one thing might like be really hard for you to reconcile. So yeah, the interview process was really, really sweet. Yeah.
That's first of all, I'm really glad that you saw the project and wanted to do more with it, because I do think, in a lot of ways that project, the first iteration and the second iteration, for us was less about, what I described. The first project was, the second one was just very focused on, it came right after George Floyd, and it was really just about uplifting Black voices and Black artists and just talking about that injustice. So we weren't really like, let's talk to everybody. We were like, no, we're telling one side of this story. So because traditionally that side is not heard. So anyway, I'm really glad that you were curious about and wanting to pick up the mantle of it, because I do think that you have an interesting perspective with where you sit in your world and the perspectives that you have access to. Um, we've kind of, because you offer such a unique perspective to this project, we've kind of just been like, go with it. And so that was actually the first time that I heard about your interview structure, which I find fascinating. So from this, so you've completed all of your interviews now with a wide spectrum of people, and you've kind of collected all this data. Where you go from here in terms of the art making process? What are the next steps for you?
Yeah, good question. So I am currently in the process of working with one of our board members who's actually serving as our dramaturg, which, if you're not familiar with that term, is kind of like a researcher on a project. A lot of times they end up coming into like period pieces to make sure that everything's historically accurate and those sorts of things. But for this, he's serving as like, people just share so many thoughts, opinions, facts, all those sorts of things within their interviews. And I want to make sure that I have like full context for this bill that someone's talking about, or if they're like, this is the statistic, that I'm like, is that true or is it not true, you know? And I think, I mean, I think you and I were talking about this the other day, that like, it is important that even if someone shares a stat that's like not true, that's still what their perspective on the situation is and where that perspective is coming from. And so a piece of misinformation could end up in the play for like very important reasons, but I don't want to be spreading misinformation to our audience. You know what I mean? And so whatever that looks like, whether it's a disclaimer, whether it's, you know, a fact sheet or something in the program, like I don't totally know what that looks like yet. But just wanting to make sure that we have as much context and accuracy in the, specifically the political side of the things that we're talking about, as possible is important to me. So that's kind of in the stage we are now, is working with him to get all of that information. And then after the summer, once we're kind of done with Tanzania and all that amazing craziness, I think I hope to move into the writing process, hopefully with a couple of our interns, which I'm really excited about. To, like Rachel said, it's been mostly just me with, you know, occasional feedback from Michael and Rachel or others on this project, which I've been grateful for, but I think it'll also be really good to have others come into the process, especially because I, as one person, have my own biases that I am intentionally or unintentionally gonna end up wanting to put into this story. And so it'll be good, I think, to have more of a diversity of voices working on the project. But yeah, then the goal is for it to turn into a play. Yeah, that all of those voices would somehow get kind of compressed into a few characters, and a few perspectives. And that, yeah, the goal of that play would be to, like Rachel mentioned echo chambers earlier, that like we consciously or unconsciously put ourselves in these echo chambers where everyone that we're talking to face and on a regular basis probably shares a lot of the same opinions we do. And that ends up meaning that a lot of times the only place that we're hearing an opposite or a different perspective is in the media, which is generally only sharing the most terrible, the most crazy versions of everything. And so it makes it that much easier for us to kind of other this opposite view of something. And so my goal with the play is that it could not be trying to push any specific viewpoint or opinion other than just encouraging empathy, but that it could respectfully present different perspectives and different viewpoints on a lot of these issues, for the audience to be able to sit back and be able to be like, oh, cool, okay, I agree with that person. Oh, wait, I don't agree with that person, but maybe I haven't heard that perspective shared in that way before. Like, I still don't agree with that, but I can see how, if that was your life experience or if that was your baseline of priorities, that's the conclusion that you would come to. And I think I want to stress so much that like empathy doesn't mean agreeing. Like
Mhm.
having empathy for someone who believes something totally different from you doesn't mean that you suddenly think that they're right. It just means that you can have respect for them within that opinion, that you can maybe start to recognize how they got there. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that is that's like my main goal for
Mm.
this project, is to just offer a little bit more perspective to hopefully bring empathy to people.
It's such a great point because I think that if we're and I yes, like it I like that you highlighted that it doesn't mean agreeing, but if we're ever going to have a dialogue, an actual conversation, a respectful sharing of ideas, it has to start from a place of empathy. And I think we all, myself included, wind ourselves in this place of, nope, I don't even want to listen because anyone who thinks like that is bad and wrong. The end. Like, I'm going to disengage and I don't care about how you came to that conclusion. And therefore, we don't have a dialogue, we don't engage in it because it's just, nope, I'm angry, you are bad and wrong, and I don't want to talk to you. And then not only do things not change, we become further divided as people. And then we don't win that way. We're never going to it's interesting that you brought up that everyone's, personal values were so aligned, even though their, political ideologies were so different. And like, I would bet that most people like want to live in a place where, everyone is doing well and like things are good for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, and
Yeah.
everyone is treated respectfully, and everyone, has the freedom to express themselves and to be who they are. And none of that is going to happen if we all can't even sit in the same room as each other, can't even listen to people in our own family, can't even have a dialogue. And then anyone who is in a position of power who wants to capitalize on that division will be able to, and then we all lose.
Mm-hmm.
So as challenging as it is, I think for all of us, again, myself included, to even want to go there and do that first step of empathizing and listening, it's so vital if we're ever going to get through the really scary time that we're entering in right now, where there really just isn't a lot of empathy at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think too, like, how divided things are makes it really difficult to be in process around something. Like, I constantly feel like if I don't feel 110% about this opinion, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, because this other person clearly knows what they're talking about way more than I do. And if I open my mouth, they're just going to know how to shut me down so fast. And, but but I think in a lot of ways, we kind of should all be in process around a lot of
Mm.
these bigger issues, because if half the country disagrees with me, if 150 million people who grew up in the same country I grew up in fundamentally don't agree with my opinion, I think it's kind of like it it seems really arrogant to
Mm.
say, to feel like I could say with 110% accuracy that I'm correct
Mm.
on
Mhm.
a lot of these sorts of issues. And so I think that it's really hard to be in process, but I think that learning how to be in process with a lot of these bigger political and moral issues um, is something that I'm trying to get better at, and that I think we can all continue to work on. And I hope that the Empathy Project can be a small piece of people being able to realize, like, oh, maybe something offered there did kind of nick something that I thought I was 110% on, and them feeling comfortable enough to not be like,
Mm-hmm.
nope, walls back up. I need to be 110% so nobody, thinks I'm weak or
Mm-hmm.
thinks I'm this part of this other political party or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
fill in the
Mm-hmm.
blank. But it's like, oh, maybe it's okay to only be 105% and to try to have some conversations with people or read a book or an article that maybe is coming from this perspective that I'm now more curious about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I love about this project and what is so important about empathy is that it gets us to the place of what do we have in common, what is the same, and underneath all of the other stuff is our common humanity, is a lot of the same things. And so if we're starting from that place, we're just more open to receiving somebody else's personal experience and understanding them a little better. And then you can depersonalize the conversation and make it more about, and I do think educating yourself is a huge piece of if we're going to make any progress too. Is so I'm speaking from, I do have some data that I'm referencing. I'm not just like making things up because I hate you because you're different from me, so I think a combination of empathy and education is like the way that we work our way through this. And it's not a personal attack on you, I think you're stupid. It's, oh hey, like I'm concerned about these 5 things. Are you also concerned? Or tell me more about the 5 things that you're concerned about. Now it's not just a personal attack. So yeah, I think that if there's any way to have a dialogue, then it certainly starts with empathy. So I'm also hopeful that this project can help us make some headway there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, just like, is there anything else you want to share from the being in process especially during this time where, I mean, man, is it hot and loud out there right now? Anything else you want to say about that?
I think, and I think we're going to get into this more in the next episode, so I won't spend too long on it, but I think listening has been such a gift to me. Going into the interview process, Rachel and I had a whole meeting because I was like, I think that listening to perspectives different than mine is going to be really anxiety inducing. I think it's going to be really draining. And so like she was helping me find like coping mechanisms to deal with that, which was so good. Like I'm glad we had that meeting. But I think that through the process of, I think, 34 interviews, so that's like hours and hours of talking to people, probably none of whom hold exactly the same opinions as I do, like I think I felt that once. I think that the overwhelming feeling was that I was actually grateful that I couldn't talk, that I'd established, like, I'm just here to understand you, because I didn't feel like I constantly had to defend my own side of an issue. I I wasn't constantly thinking about, okay, what am I going to say next? All these sorts of things. I just got to listen and I learned so much. And I think there are things that I thought that I was 110% on when we started this interview process that after hearing 34 different perspectives, I was like, I need to go back to my process on this because people brought up really good points that I had never thought of before. And I genuinely, like, people would be like, oh my gosh, like, thank you for providing me a space to talk about this. And I was like, stop, thank you. Like, thank you for providing me a space to listen to a perspective that's not my own. And it was so sweet to see how doing the interview, which in my mind was going to be like anxiety inducing for me and me like taking someone's time for some silly little play project, like actually for both sides it was a massive gift, and that was so cool to get to be a part of.
Wow, I want to sit with that for a while. That's a really big thing that you just shared. Thank you for sharing that experience. I think that's something we can all think about. Yeah, the different expectations. Oh, this is going to be terrible and suck, and I'm going to have to listen to people I disagree with, and actually wound up being a gift, and you wound up reconsidering because you just listened, just offered the space to listen. You didn't defend yourself. You just were in that listening place. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm glad that our next episode, just teasing you all up for next week, we are going to talk about listening. We're going to have a whole episode about listening. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much for listening to this episode.
Yes, thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for listening to the next episode next Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to follow us on social media. And do you, Melissa, have a call to action for us today?
Yeah, I would love for you to just think about what is a group of people that you have a hard time finding empathy for, and why is that? Like, what is that rooted in? Because sometimes we don't totally know where our thoughts come from. So yeah, think about that, and I would love to hear your answers. So you can email us at podcast@outerlooptheater.org, or DM us. Like, please, I want to hear about this, because I think the answers will be some really interesting things. Yeah.
For sure. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Yay. All right. Bye.
Bye.